Hi everyone, welcome to the January 18th edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. I'm David Aragona, here with my usual co-host Craig Milkowski. Looking back at last weekend's racing, Craig, no graded stakes racing on the schedule at all. I don't think we had a single one of those, but there were some stakes from around the country that are worth discussing. I know we talked about the California Cup Day at Santa Anita on Saturday. There were also some Florida-bred races at Gulfstream Park. A few of those earned some notable speed figures, especially a couple of the sprints at both Gulfstream and Santa Anita. We'll talk about those. There was the fifth season, which produced a feel-good story at Oaklawn. And then there were some allowance horses and maiden winners that were worth discussing at Tampa and Aqueduct. So an interesting week of racing, but definitely none of the big names in the sport in action.
No, I think we might have seen a couple horses who could be competitive in graded stakes. And I've mentioned before, I like talking about these kind of graded stakes are easy. And maybe we can find a few gems in here.
Like I said, we talked about the California Cup on the forecast last week, so let's start with Santa Anita on this Pacecast and talk a little bit about a couple of the stakes that came up the fastest races from their card last Saturday. And the biggest speed figure on that Santa Anita Saturday card was earned by Brickyard Ride in the California Cup Sprint. Craig, this is just a really fast horse who, when he's able to get clear on the front end, he is really tough to run down, especially against California-bred competition.
Yeah, he is. He didn't get, I don't have the official speed figure yet, but he's going to get about a 121 would be my guess. So right up there among some of his better races. And he didn't get it easy. I mean, he was up front by himself on a clear lead, but he did it going pretty quick. He's actually going to get a few points of bonus to his final time figure. So it's not like they just handed him the race, which had happened in one of his recent wins where he went crazy slow. But this was a good, solid win. He beat a solid field in here, and he's definitely a Calbred who can compete in open stakes company.
Yeah, he's one of these horses that when you scroll through his past performances, you could really see the stark difference. When he's able to get up by a length and a half, clear at the first or second call of his races, he is really tough to run down. Unless he runs into a horse that's just simply better than him, he's usually around to the finish. But when he's got a horse alongside of him that's challenging him in a duel, he folds like a tent. And that's what he did last time he was seen in the Pat O'Brien. But this was the former situation when he was able to get clear of these horses, and he's just probably better than the California-bred competition anyway. A approximated speed figure, Craig, of 121 for this horse, which is, right around the top that he's run in his career when he gets a similar situation. This was actually his second straight victory in the California Cup Sprint. He won it last January as well. His connections I saw are talking about maybe trying some bigger goals right now. I saw them throw around a race like the Dubai Golden Shaheen in March as something that they might target, and a fast horse like him that could make the front end could be dangerous over that track.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I don't blame him. There's not a huge amount of sprinters. I'd have to see who's pointed for that race. But we saw a pretty disappointing Breeders' Cup sprint when Jackie's Warrior didn't show up. I doubt a horse like Flightline's going to show up for a race like that. So why not? He would certainly be competitive.
Yeah, especially at Meydan, you often see the horses that get out to the front end towards the inside are pretty dangerous over that track from year to year, and Brickyard Ride is the kind of horse that can certainly get to the front over most any other sprinters that are out there. So a nice horse. We'll see how he fares against some tougher open company competition in the future. Craig, we saw another gate-to-wire victory in the Sunshine Millions Filly and Mare Turf Sprint, the race name that is a real mouthful there, as Legs Galore went gate-to-wire going the downhill 6.5 furlongs. And for a 12-horse field, we kind of talked about it on the forecast last week, there wasn't a ton of speed in this race, and nobody really tried to challenge Legs Galore at any point.
No, she pretty much had things her own way. It was a really even pace when we'll see the pace figures in our charts. And once that happens on a clear lead, she's always going to be really tough to run down. You were dead right about her. She took to the hill perfectly. She's going to get about a 114 TimeformUS speed figure for the win. So one thing you can say is she is one consistent mare because she just keeps churning out those kind of 115 type speed figures over and over.
Yeah, in her turf races that are less than a mile, the true turf sprints, she is now 7 for 8 in her career, I believe. I mean, just a really, or I should sorry, 6 for 7 in her career. She did win one race going a mile, but just a really remarkable resume for a very fast horse. And she was able to stretch her speed to 6.5 furlongs here. I do think the way this race played out and the pace definitely helped her. As you said, it was kind of an even pace from a pace figure standpoint. And when you look at the raw fractions, down the hill, when you're able to click off those even 22 and changes for every quarter mile, it's really difficult to close. And you could see even in that third quarter, she went 22.20 seconds. I mean, it's just impossible for anybody to close from the back when you've got the front runner running that fast coming into the top of the stretch. And the horse that was most compromised by the way this race played out was Warren Showtime, who you could see coming to the quarter pole just had no chance because the leaders were not stopping and she was way too far back.
Yeah, she was taken way back off the pace for some reason. She had shown she could stay a little closer to a moderate pace like this, but I don't think she was given the best chance to win by her rider. I mean, I understand it. He maybe expected the pace to be hot, but it just didn't develop, and I would probably give her another chance out of here. She's been a really solid mare for a long time.
Let's move on to that Florida bred card at Gulfstream Park, where the feature race there was the Sunshine Sprint going 6 furlongs on the dirt. And that was won by Gatsby, who got in a tussle with Cool Quest at the top of the stretch. Both of these horses have a lot of early speed. Cool Quest was able to get to the front end under a hustling ride from Julien Leparoux, but Gatsby just kept coming at him and wore him down late.
Yeah, he's a horse who just keeps getting better. He's a newly turned 4-year-old. This was his best speed figure yet. I think it's going to wind up being about a 118. I will post all of these later today. I'll have all the figures for all the weekend and put them out on Twitter. But yeah, it's a horse who is just getting better every time out, it seems. So not sure what the limit is for him. I don't know if he's really a graded stakes type horse, but this figure puts him pretty close.
Yeah, he's a horse that's done a lot of racing in his short career. This was his 19th start as a newly turned 4-year-old. You don't often see horses exiting their 3-year-old years with 18 starts already under their belts, but this is one who was very active early in his career when he was previously with trainer Juan Alvarado. He's really taken a step forward very recently for trainer Carlos David, especially in his last 5 starts. His speed figures have significantly improved, and he's kind of maintained that level and even took a step forward in this race. He was coming off a narrow loss to the talented Drain the Clock, who obviously could not run back in this race since he is not a Florida bred. But Gatsby improved on that narrow defeat to a pretty nice horse last time to beat Cool Quest here. And Cool Quest, Craig, is a horse that we've talked about a little bit on this podcast before. A Brian Litch trainee who was coming out of some races in Kentucky and New York, had shown a lot of talent at different points, but had been a little bit inconsistent. Seems like, though, he's really taken a liking to this Gulfstream Park main track, and he's now put forth 2 good efforts in a row.
Yeah, he's a quick horse. He's another one that kind of runs the same speed figures. He runs in that 115 range. Actually going to get a little bit higher, probably about a 117 here. So really solid horse. The only time he hasn't run that number recently was when he won last time, and that was probably because the pace was really slow. It was only 5.5 furlongs. So he was absolutely flying late. He just couldn't run that big final time number.
Now, Craig, the race coming into this weekend that I was most anticipating was the allowance race that took place right before the Sunshine Sprint, where Olympiad went off as the heavy favorite. This race did lose a major player at scratch time when Vindictive, who figured to vie for favoritism with Olympiad, who was coming off a narrow loss in the Discovery, he was scratched from this race, so that made Olympiad the heavy favorite. But, Craig, this is a 4-year-old that I think could make some noise this year in graded stakes company. You'll talk about the speed figure, but he had run deceptively well in his prior start when he was 4th in the Cigar Mile, a race where his rider, Rad Ortiz, I think maybe gave up on him a little bit prematurely, but he's shown talent right from the start and seems like he's really putting things together now.
Yeah, he's run some big numbers. He was a horse who ran that nice second behind in the infamous Baby Yoda race, which has drawn a lot of scrutiny. But I think it's turned out that actually was a pretty good race. As you said, I thought he ran deceptively well in the Cigar. He got a nice speed figure that day. And he probably ran his best speed figure yet. Again, another one I don't have officially, but I have it pegged as about a 123, which would be his best. And most impressively is he was able to handle the 2 turns, which is something he hadn't tried before.
Yeah, it's kind of funny to go back early in this horse's PPs and kind of check out some of those maiden races that he was coming out of. I mean, when he broke his maiden, he beat Caddo River and Greatest Honor. It's funny, some of those maidens that were contested at Saratoga and Belmont that summer and fall of 2020 have proven to be exceptionally strong in producing future stakes runners. Obviously, Olympiad, not a stakes winner himself just yet, but certainly seems like he's on that path, especially after this performance. It was nice to see him pass this two-turn test, because I do get the sense that this is a horse that, while they concentrated on sprints early on in his career, I think that was just due to the fact that they were getting some experience under his belt. He does seem like the kind of horse that will be able to stretch out, though he's by Speightstown. That's a versatile sire. Gets a lot of sprinters, but also horses that can go longer. And on the dam side, there is plenty of route pedigree. His dam Tokyo Time, I think, was a stakes winner going long on the turf. And there's plenty of second generation pedigree there as well. So just a lot to like about Olympiad. I really was impressed with the way this horse leveled off at the end of this race and ran through the wire finishing. So I'm excited to see where they go with him next. I did see that they added him. I don't know if the connections did or that was just Gulfstream Park taking the initiative, but they did add him to the invitation list for the Pegasus World Cup. I don't know if they're going to run him back in 2 weeks, but he could be the kind of horse that could get to that level eventually.
Yeah, I want to see him in stakes races. I don't want to see him thrown to the wolves with horses like Life is Good and Knicks Go. I think that would be a bit too much, particularly off 2 weeks rest. Don't want to get too far off track. We'll talk about the Pegasus plenty, but it seems like they're really having trouble filling that field. They're basically inviting any horse that can run a decent speed figure, it seems like.
Yeah, that first list of invitations, I think, was a little aspirational, including Flightline, even though his connections had expressly said for a long time they were not running in that race. I think that Gulfstream Park and the Strota Group, they want to create more interest in the race than maybe there might have been from the connections. But yeah, we'll see. It is a very interesting race to see how the field comes up, and because with those two front runners, Life is Good and Knicks Go, if there were some kind of remotely interesting closer in the race, it could be the kind of horse that you want to make a case for, but it remains to be seen who winds up in the field and if anybody's going to be able to pick up the pieces, if there's something to be picked up from the remnants of that duel that we're likely to see. Let's move on to Oaklawn Park, where their stakes race this past weekend was the 5th season on Saturday. This one going a mile for the older horses. And feel-good story here, Craig, as the old man, 9-year-old Rated R Superstar gets back to the winner's circle off the layoff. A horse that's been competitive in these stakes races at Oaklawn going back a number of years, but he was able to get the job done here, making the first start of his 2022 campaign.
Yeah, it was really good to see from my perspective. I was surprised he went off 25-1. His form was better than that, but he's a horse I've become familiar with at Remington Park. I've spoken to his owner more than a few times, Danny Caldwell. He's a perennial leading owner here at Remington Park, always does well at Oaklawn as well. So I was happy to see him win. It's a nice story. As far as the speed figure goes, it was nothing too special. He got a 114 for the win. The pace of the race was, I would say, solid. It wasn't anything too crazy. Actually, I would say it was moderate on the slow side, which would kind of seem to be against a horse who comes from behind. But the one thing to note for me was the ride that he was given by jockey David Cabrera. I thought he just won the race when he made the move. He was kind of toward the back of the pack on the back stretch, and the rail just seemed to open up, and he was able to make up 3 or 4 lengths really quickly to get into prime striking condition. And I just thought that was the difference in winning and losing this race.
Well, this is a bit of a red board because we didn't talk about it on the Pacecast, on the forecast last week. Not that I liked Rated R Superstar. That's not what I'm getting at. I would not have picked this horse at 25-1. But who was betting Concert Tour at 3-2 at this race, Craig? I mean, I don't get that at all. I mean, I guess switching to the Brad Cox barn, his horses just always take money at Oaklawn, and Joel Rosario climbing aboard, I suppose, was a good sign to some, but I mean, I thought it had been pretty established at this point that the races he was exiting as a 3-year-old have not turned out to be that strong, yet the public still went for him anyway.
Yeah, that surprised me as well. He was an auto toss for me in this race. It'll be curious to see the horse he dealt with a few times there, Caddo River. I'm not sure if he's made his return. I've seen him in the entries a couple times, and now I can't actually remember if he ran. But I imagine he's another one that's going to take money as well, and I'd be a little bit negative on him too.
Caddo River did return in December and was disqualified out of a win. I'm not looking at the TimeformUS PPs right now, but he got an 81 buyer for that performance, so I wouldn't exactly say that he validated the form of that Arkansas Derby. Yeah, it just seems like that last year's Rebel and Arkansas Derby have over time proven to be pretty poor races from a quality standpoint. I know that Superstock won some minor derbies later in the year, but certainly did not repeat that grade 1 form that we saw from him that day, and I'm using grade 1 in quotation marks. So yeah, surprising to me that Caddo River, especially exiting the Bob Baffert stable, was as supported as he was in this race. He never looked like he was traveling well, never looked like he was going to get anything in this race, basically as soon as they broke from the gate. But yeah, I thought it was a great ride from David Cabrera on Rated R Superstar. I echo everything that you said about him, and a good effort from Mucho to be second. I think the pace of this race was on the moderate side. The field was very bunched the entire way, and I think that did play into the hands of the forward and inside horse in Mucho, who was able to cross over from an outside post position. But nice to see him stretch out in distance. The one other horse I want to mention coming out of this race, Craig, just, my trip handicapping brain, I can't turn it off, is Silver Prospector. Just given the way this race was run, where the whole field was bunched up, he was literally 5 wide the entire way. I don't know if there was anything Ricardo Santana could have done about it because he broke from an outside post, but he's the kind of horse you probably want to give another shot to.
Yeah, for sure. I actually bet some money on him in here, and I knew it was over going into the first turn. And no fault of the rider. It's just the way the race develops. Sometimes when you draw a wide post, the pace wasn't very quick, and they bunched up, and he basically had no chance after that. So I agree, I'd give him another chance. As to Mucho, you don't often see a horse try 2 turns for the first time in their 30th career start, but that's what he did, and it certainly opens up some options, because he's been a solid enough sprinter, but he's never really came through with a big win, so maybe 2 turns will be more to his liking. I do agree maybe things were his own way, and he looks a little bit better than he ran, but I'd give him another shot because we know what he is sprinting, and that's basically an allowance horse.
Move on to Aqueduct from this past week, Craig, where I think the track surface was a big topic of discussion. Really one of the stars, aside from the horses that actually competed over it, because I think it influenced the results in a lot of these races. Let's start by talking about Sunday, where What Do You Think Now won a optional claiming allowance race, nominated to 2 other than, by over 10 lengths. Sunday, Craig, was a day where the main track was playing very slowly. We saw the track speed up and slow down at different points throughout the week. It was definitely on the slower side on Sunday, so I think that made it very surprising that What Do You Think Now was able to come home as fast as he did. I'm interested to know what the final time speed figure would be for this race, because, they went slow early, but he flew home.
Actually, I think I can look that one up because it should be in the charts. And I actually did the figures for Sunday, and believe it or not, it was a 125 final time figure for him. It's knocked way down because the pace was slow early. These are really tough days to make speed figures for. I think we have a pretty good handle on Aqueduct. Neither me nor my assistant who does them is afraid to make changes during the day, because I think it's proven that this track is just crazy. It'll go from slow to fast, and slow to really slow, back to just kind of slow, all in the same day. I know we had some windy days at Aqueduct, which you kind of have to take into account as well, but I don't think there's much doubt. This was a pretty big performance from What Do You Think Now?
Yeah, and it's worth really dissecting how the track was playing from a speed standpoint on these days, but also how track bias had an impact on the results of these races. And we're going to talk about Thursday next, but I think Sunday is a day where really consistently throughout the card, we saw horses that were riding the rail have a big advantage. And I do believe that's what exaggerated this performance of What Do You Think Now, who not only got to set a slow pace, but did so while racing on the best part of the track with Trevor McCarthy just just hugging the rail the entire way. And I do want to give a shout out to Trevor McCarthy, who swept the entire late pick 4 on this Sunday card and did so with some very clever rides, riding the rail with a lot of these horses, giving them their best chances. He's definitely a rider who's been paying attention to the way the track is playing. What do you think now? He's always been a talented horse, but I always am very skeptical about horses running back to efforts like this when they kind of were buoyed by two factors, a slow pace and a track bias. There's likely to be a regression coming.
Yeah, this is one of those cases where I like the formula for the TimeformUS speed figures that actually knocks his figure down to a 115. I think that's probably a much better assessment of the horse than the 125 final time number.
Moving backwards in time to Thursday's card at Aqueduct. And as you said, Greg, there was some weather in the New York area this past week, some very cold temperatures on Saturday. I think that also affected things on Sunday. I know you've noticed this quite a bit too, but on the extremely cold days in New York, it seems like the track tends to get very slow. On days when it gets a little bit warmer, the track can get a lot faster. And I think something we saw on Thursday at Aqueduct was changes in temperature and changes in the way perhaps they made some changes to the track, but it was a track that was changing throughout the day. And early on, it seemed like inside speed was unbeatable. Horses that rode the rail just were winning races by huge margins. Later on, it seemed like that was mitigated a little bit. I feel like maybe the bias was so pronounced early that it was almost impossible not to notice. I wonder if some minor changes were made to the track during the day. I know there's a limit to what they can do during a race car, kind of turning over the track or back raking or whatever they do to correct a bias. But it did seem like the way the track was playing changed throughout the day. It was definitely, though, a much faster surface than what we saw on Sunday. And the biggest speed figure was run by Green Light Go for Jimmy Jerkins in race 8, a horse who won by 9 lengths and seems like he's gotten back into pretty good form after showing a lot of promise early in his career.
Yeah, this track was definitely the outlier. It was almost like a normal racetrack in New York, and then we returned the next day to just glacially slow tracks. But it was a good effort by Green Light Go. He's kind of an interesting horse in that as a 2-year-old, he was actually, I think, the early Kentucky Derby favorite for a time as a 2-year-old. I mean, a way too early Kentucky Derby favorite, but he never really made any breakthrough. He just kept running the same speed figures over and over again around that 110. But he finally made it back to the barn of Jimmy Jerkins for the fall high weight, and he suddenly ran a new top, a 118 TimeformUS speed figure, and he backed it up on Thursday with a very nice 121. Now, maybe the conditions had something to do with it. As you said, by the time the 8th race rolled around, I don't think it was nearly as biased as it was early in the card. But he ran a big race. I mean, anytime you win by 9 lengths, it's not really a big surprise that you get a good number. But another career top for him. So whatever Jimmy Jerkins is doing with him, he seems to have a good touch. And I would imagine he'll be in stakes company next time we see him.
Yeah, he was the 6-5 favorite in the Champagne of 2019 over Tiz the Law, and Junior Alvarado, who was the rider of both horses, stayed with Green Light Go rather than going with Tiz the Law, and that's the race that gave Manny Franco the mount on Tiz the Law moving forward. Yeah, he was highly respected at one point, and like you said, his speed figures just kind of plateaued. He never took that step forward, but it seems like now as a 5-year-old, going back to his original stable, something's clicking with this horse. And he took a nice step forward here. He was too wide early, did get to the rail at about the halfway point in this race and rode it the rest of the way. I don't know if that was really an advantage by the time in the day that this race was run, as you were getting at, Craig. Much more of an advantage early on in the first half of the card. So I view this as a legitimate performance by Green Light Go, and I'll be interested to see what he does next time out. The other race to discuss from this Thursday card at Aqueduct was the first of the day, when that rail bias seemed as strong as it was at any point during this entire week at Aqueduct, and that was a race that was won by From Another Mother, the 3-year-old that was coming out of an off-the-board finish in the Remsen. They tried that graded stakes as a maiden, but they went back to this maiden company to break his maiden in this race as the heavy 1-5 favorite, and he delivered, but he had pace and track bias working in his favor.
Yeah, this is another one. The final time figure was a 112, but only a 99 on the overall speed figure. Again, I think the bias and the pace adjustment, we don't adjust for bias, but it kind of gets baked in there when the pace is slow. And I think the 99 is probably more, he's the kind of horse that when he moves into allowance conditions next time, I would definitely be looking to beat.
Yeah, I've seen his connections are saying that they're targeting the Gotham for his next start, which I understand. I mean, he was second to Mo Donegal, the Remsen winner, in a maiden race going one turn last year, so the 1 turn mile is the right kind of distance for this horse. We'll just see if he stacks up against the field that's going to be assembled for the Gotham from a quality standpoint, because I agree with the way the TimeformUS algorithm handles a race like this, a horse that's able to have everything his own way on the front end and control things and then sprint for home. It's not the most taxing performance, and if you're questioning the rail bias at all, go back and watch not just the pan, but the head-on of really the first 4 races of the day at Aqueduct on this Thursday card. You'll just see horses that ride the rail seem like they're on a conveyor belt, just being carried away from the rest of the field, and it's like everybody else who's outside of that 1 to 2 path, it's as if they're running on a sandy beach, and everybody else is kind of on that sand that's like baked by water down towards the inside. I mean, it's just a real stark difference, and in this first race of the day, you saw it with From Another Mother and Jester Song, the top 2 finishers. They both were in that inside path until they got to the quarter pole, basically, and they finished far ahead of the rest of the field. So I do think you want to pay attention to bias. And I'm going to put out a horses to watch video on Daily Racing Form's YouTube channel. I'll tweet it out later this week, where I talk about some horses that were compromised by the track bias and the rail bias that we saw popping up from this past week. But it's definitely a handicapping angle that you want to pay attention to.
Yeah, and this is one where I would want to make notes because we don't have it rated as a bias color in this one, which makes sense because we only give a rating for a whole card, and it wasn't. But in this case, I think it's clear. And to your point, the first 4 races, it's not like they were all 1 to 5 like From Another Mother, because the next 2 were pretty big long shots, and they won decisively riding that rail. So good to take notes, and I look forward to your horses to watch segment from this day.
Let's close out this podcast by visiting one more venue, Tampa Bay Downs, from this past weekend. We're not going to talk about their stakes action. I think they had a couple minor stakes for the 3-year-old sprinters, but there were 2 allowance races on the turf, Craig, that I think are worth highlighting. One of them was from Wednesday, where the Chad Brown-trained 4-year-old filly In Italian made her return from a layoff. This race, I was kind of on the fence at whether to discuss it or not. It didn't get the fastest speed figure, but I just feel like this is a horse that has real potential that we've only seen glimpses of from this Chad Brown stable, but I've liked all of her races.
Yeah, she's going to get a 111 TimeformUS speed figure, but I'd be the first to admit I don't think that's her ceiling by any means. She looked like she's probably got more in the tank, and a lot of times we talk about those kind of things, and people say that horses could run faster when they win easily, but I think it's actually true sometimes on the turf because the races are so dependent on the pace of the race and the competition in the race, not so much on dirt. But In Italian is a horse. She's another one of those newly turned fillies. She's improved every time, and I think she's probably got another pretty substantial jump in her.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning the name of the horse in Italian, because I think I forgot to do that in my lead-in. This is a filly who had debuted over the Tampa Bay course last year as a 3-year-old, was very green, took a nice step forward on her second start at Belmont, and then was not seen since last summer. So they've had some trouble keeping her on the racetrack, but this was a good return to the races, and I agree with what you said about sometimes when these horses race against inferior competition on the turf, they're held down a little bit because you're typically not going to see turf horses win races by 10 or 12 lengths like you will on the dirt. So I just liked the way she did it. She's got a really big stride on her. She's a daughter of Dubawi. We don't see a whole lot of Dubawis competing in this country. And I know that her connections, Peter Brandt, they're not afraid to go overseas and purchase a horse with a big European pedigree like this. So I'm intrigued to see what she could do and how she develops if she's able to stay on the racetrack this year.
Yeah, another one note I'd make about her, she's went wire to wire in her last 2. She'll probably show up with a label as a speed horse, but her races don't really tell me that she has to go to the front. both of the paces in her races have been really slow. It's just a matter of nobody wanted to challenge her. I suspect she's a horse who could take back a bit and run just fine.
Saw an interesting allowance field assembled on Saturday at Tampa Bay Downs in their 8th race. This one was won by Cheryl Spite, who, you might remember, Craig, there was a lot of buzz about this horse being perhaps one of the top choices in the 2020 Kentucky Derby, going all the way back during the pandemic when this horse had won a couple of races at Woodbine so impressively, and it didn't look like there was a whole lot of depth to that Derby field behind Tis the Law, and I mean, I guess you could say in retrospect, authentic. So Cheryl Spite, his connections were kind of toying with the idea of running in that race. I forget exactly what happened, but they didn't make the starting gate there, and his career kind of went off course a little bit, never really validated those first couple of efforts, but now as a 5-year-old, it seems like maybe they're getting him back on track.
Yeah, this was a horse who I believe went off the favorite in one of the big, maybe it was the Woodbine Mile. If he wasn't favored, he was close. He went off a pretty short price that day. He's obviously had a few issues since that time. He's only run a couple times, has a couple layoff lines mixed in there. Didn't run much in his return, but he sure ran this day. He's going to get a nice speed figure, I would guess about a 118 TimeformUS, which would be a career best for him. And, you know, maybe it's one of those things where things didn't go well during his 4-year-old year. He's sticking around, and he's a fully mature horse. So if they figure out what he's done, you know, what went wrong with him and can keep him on the track, that 118 could move him right back in the stakes competition.
And speaking of horses who had Kentucky Derby aspirations, actually the runner-up in this race, Hidden Stash, was making his first start since the Kentucky Derby when he ran in this turf allowance race. I'm not sure why they didn't give him another shot in the dirt, but maybe they always wanted to try turf with this horse. And he got back to the he got on the surface here, and I thought put in a respectable effort to be second, because I do think Cheryl Spite is a pretty good horse. I mean, the 118 TimeformUS speed figure that I think is an estimate that he got here, I mean, that's the kind of number that if he progresses a little bit, can put him in the conversation in some graded stakes races, and it had always seemed like he could be bound for those races based on how impressively he started his career. So I don't think it's any disgrace for Hidden Stash to lose to a horse like that, and both of these could have decent futures on the grass.
Yeah, I thought it was a solid race. I was obviously going to be more impressed with Cheryl Spate. I thought he ran really, really well, especially based on his lines, and won pretty easily. But Hidden Stash ran fine. It'll be interesting to see what they do with him, because he obviously can run on both surfaces.
Well, that's all for this week's podcast. We will have some more exciting racing to talk about, I think, when we do this next week, because I believe we have at least one 3-year-old prep taking place on Fairgrounds on Saturday, little comp stakes. And speaking of Fairgrounds, Craig and I will be covering that on the TimeformUS forecast later in the week. Look for that to come out probably sometime in early Friday evening. We're planning to have a guest on that podcast, DRF Fairgrounds analyst Marcus Hirsch. So if you have not been following Marcus's Fairgrounds picks lately, you really should, because he's been giving out some pretty good opinions. So I'm definitely looking forward to getting Marcus's opinion on that Saturday card, Craig.
Yeah, Marcus is one of my favorite guests that we've had on when either of us couldn't make it. He always fills in well, does a great job, and he really follows the fairground circuit closely. So I respect anything he has to say. I, of course, follow him on Twitter and try to take note of what he says about biases. He's really been good on the turf, too, and I know some of the races we're going to be talking about are on that surface.
Yeah, hopefully the weather cooperates. I know that's always kind of an X factor in the New Orleans area, but hopefully all those races stay on the turf at the fairgrounds and they're able to run that all-stakes pick 5 sequence late in the card as intended on both surfaces. So, yeah, we'll talk about that on Friday. Look for that podcast when it comes out. But thanks for listening to the TimeformUS Pacecast this week. Remember, you can always catch these podcasts on DRF.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Wherever you get your podcasts, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Thanks for tuning in, and make sure to catch that TimeformUS forecast on Friday.